Well, hello, I'm Dr. Miller, and I am one of the associate deans here in the College of Education. And I'm just going to do a real quick, nothing special video. You can see just plain old paper on the wall, because we want to give you an overview of how to use the edTPA lesson planning template. So we decided to do it this way, a Zoom meeting, so that you can see an exemplary file as well as I talk you through it, so you'll be able to create these lesson plans on your own. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get the sample up for you. And at this point, you should be seeing an exemplary edTPA lesson planning template. Now, it is an extensive template. Now, the purpose of this template is to teach you to think about every component of instruction so you can help all of your students master the content that you're teaching. And when I say all, I'm talking about the diverse group of students. You're talking about students that may be gifted, or those that may have some challenges in cognitive processing issues, or those that might be learning support, or those that may be ESL students. Whatever the case may be, you have to plan for all those students so they can all master the same standards that you're being taught. So you'll see here on the screen, wherever there is something highlighted yellow, you're going to want to fill that out. So you're going to title for your lesson, the grade that you're teaching, and also the subject and the date. So as we move down, you'll see that the lesson plan, edTPA lesson plan, has 4 parts to it. Now, the edTPAs are a national exam that many of you are going to have to take to get reciprocity into your home state. So when you finish this program and you complete all the exams, we'll recommend you for a credential through the state of Florida, and then we'll work with you and stay with you until you have reciprocity in your home states. And there's a few states that require the edTPAs. So we're adding this into our program because there's a growing number of states who are going to require these edTPAs in the future. So part 1 is basically you outlining what you're going to teach. So you see here on the left-hand side, your central focus. That's the big idea. What's your lesson about? You know, in this case, they're going to read a play and identify the parts of a play, middle, beginning, and end, and those kind of things, what problems are being addressed and things like that. You could say they're going to learn the 13th Amendment, or 3x3 multiplication, or whatever the case may be. What's the central focus? And then the next section here, the standards that are being addressed. Now you see that we want you to list the whole nomenclature of the standard. In this case, this person used the Florida state standards. So they got the nomenclature, the LAFS .4, .RL, .1, and then they said what the standard was. And it's actually a link to the actual standard itself. So that's an option that you can do as well. Or you could just copy down the words of the standard right into the template. It doesn't matter, whatever's easier for you. And then the content objectives. So what are students going to learn? The student will understand, the student will learn, the student will know, the student will be able to do. You want to put your outcomes. What will that student be able to know, do, or what understand by the end of that lesson after you finish teaching it? All right. And again, this template will be there's a link to this template in your course room. So you'll see this exact template in your course room. I'm just going over it for you right now. The second part of part 1 is for you to talk about the academic language demands. Now, there's a growing number of ESL students in our schools, especially public schools across the country. So you're going to want to break down what you need to do so that language is not a barrier for those students to be able to master the content that you're teaching. So as far as language function, you want to first of all kind of let them know, you know, okay, what's this language do? What do you want them to develop in the lesson as a result of the language for your ESL students? And then there are some demands, like what's some of the vocabulary and things that you want them to know. So there's some text that you're going to want to write in there as far as that's concerned. You know, what specific ways will students need to use the language? So now they know what the vocabulary is, so how do you want them to use it? And what should they come with? You know, what's the lowest skills, their prior knowledge that they should know or understand in order to be able to accomplish this lesson as far as the language demands are concerned. And as far as the key learning task is, So what are you going to do so that they can practice language demands if there's a barrier or ESL student in your course and in the class for the lesson that you're teaching, right? And essential literacy strategies, this is where you want to talk about the strategies that you're going to use to help them comprehend that language inside of the lesson that you're teaching. You know, are you going to show pictures? Are you going to give them a keyword guide? Are you going to partner with another student? There's tons of PSYOP or English language learner strategies that you can use. So in this section, you're just outlining all of these supports and all of these strategies. Then you move to the next section, which is 21st century skills. And you'll see a list of the 21st century skills based on the standards, 21st century skill standards. And you just check or write down the ones that apply to this lesson. So you can see this student had creativity and innovation. They had critical thinking and problem solving, and they explained how that fits in. Communication and collaboration and information literacy. So you'll explain how that fits into your lesson based on whatever 21st century skills you're going to, that apply to what you're trying to teach. So there's no limit. You can have them all. You can have one, you can have two, you can have three. Just say what they are based on the lesson that you're teaching. And don't stretch it. If it's not there, it's just not there. No big deal, okay? And the next section is you'll kind of utilize knowledge about your students. So at this point, you want to kind of tell, what is their prior knowledge and what do you know about the group so that you can get them to work together as a group or individually to be able to master the content. So in order to do that, you need to know what each individual knows and you need to know what the group knows collectively. What's their culture? How do they operate together? What are some of the things that would be keywords, triggers, things that would help them to be able to relate or match that content to things they already know. So you'll write down those things as far as groups of students with similar needs or individual students. You'll break it down. This student did into students with IEPs or 501 plans, and then English language learners or ESLs or ELLs, whichever term you like to use. Then you want to talk about those strategies. So now you have the differences in the group, what makes them tick. So what are some of the strategies that you can use? So you can actually describe an activity that you would put in place for students to be able to work in partners or groups or jigsaw or whatever group strategy, cooperative learning, project-based learning that you want to put in place. So you'll describe that in this section here. And then finally, you'll move down to building on those personal and cultural community assets. So if you can't relate, you can't educate. So you're going to need to know something about your students, something about their community, the culture of them, the blends, the mixes, the diversity. So you can give examples that they'll understand, examples that will trigger and dig into their prior knowledge. You'll need to understand things that your strategies will be engaging and not disengaging. To be able to do that, you need to understand the culture of the community, be able to use community assets, maybe bring in parents, examples, community leaders, things of that sort. All those things can be dropped into your lesson right here. And sometimes they apply and sometimes they don't. But this template makes you think about them, so your instruction is totally inclusive. And then finally, what are some of the misconceptions? So what are some things that students may think about the lesson that you're about to teach? Or even what are some things that you as a teacher, some of your implicit bias that you assume students may know or not know? And just throw them out there. This then makes you dig a little deeper than just what the students' needs are, but it makes you get in front of any pitfalls and be able to answer questions for them and get around your own bias so you're way open and responsive and alert to their needs as well. And then, of course, for every lesson that you teach, you're going to look for interdisciplinary connections. So you always want to kill 2, 3, 4 birds, if possible, with one stone. So if I'm teaching a science lesson, I need to look for interdisciplinary connections to language arts or reading, or maybe math. And if I'm teaching social studies, is there any implications for reading or math or science. I mean, so you're always looking for those interdisciplinary connections. And in this section, you'll be able to say what they are so that you're way more aware and you can thematically plan a little better and work with other people on your teams to enrich the experience for your students. This takes us to part 2. Now, in part 2, you outline the actual instruction. You just ask the delivery process, what you're going to do. So basically, how you're going to introduce the students to the lesson. You know, this student did a very long before, during, after, you know, vocabulary. She kind of listed all those things there. With me, I like to say what my anticipatory set's going to be. Like, you know, how am I going to catch their attention? How am I going to lead them into the message? You know, what's that little clue? Am I going to do a riddle? Am I going to ask them something and then it leads to a dead end? You know, a what if question? You know, whatever the case may be, how will you set the agenda, introduce it, set the purpose, explain? How will you get the students interested in what you're about to teach? And then the next section here is learning activities. This is what's going to happen during the lesson. How are you going to, you know, how are you going to teach it? What's it going to look like? What's the learning activities going to be? Is it going to be a cooperative learning activity? Is it going to be direct instructions? Will students come to the board? Will they jigsaw and each get up and then present to teach the rest of the class? And then we have one full presentation. Here, you just get into during. What's going on during that lesson? And you can look at what this student said. The next section is the structured practice and the application. So whatever you teach a student, you have to give them an opportunity to practice it, to make sure that it's locked in and locked on. I don't know if you ever heard the old I do, we do, you do cycle. So in this case, whatever your subject is, there's going to be some kind of learning activity, learning engagement, whether it's discovery, whether it's lecture, whether it's an example, I don't know, whatever the case may be, some kind of learning of new content will take place. And then you have to somehow figure out how you're going to structure a practice and guide practice, how you're going to put supports in place for things that students, you know, may miss or mess up, you know, and how they're going to do that independently or maybe in a group, whatever the case may be. But at this section, what's the practice and the application? What's going to happen during the lesson? You're still during the lessons. It's not afterwards, okay? And this next section, you're going to close. You're going to bring closure to your lesson. So you've taught the lesson, you got them involved, you taught the lesson, you used the activity, you gave them a chance to practice, you check for understanding, use your formative assessment strategies. Now you're going to close that lesson. You're in the after section. So what's going to happen now? You know, what are you going to do after the lesson? How are you going to round it up and close it down? How are you going to make sure that everyone's on the same page? You know, what is your reflection going to look like? Your extended ideas? You know, are you going to say, so now that we know this, what if we change one component? What will happen then? Are you setting up your next lesson, the next unit that you're about to do? You know, will there be some kind of review or restatement? Are you going to do that yourself or use the students to do it or some kind of tools? Will there be an exit ticket? You know, all those things will happen in the after piece here. And then we want you to talk about extension. So we'll always want to look at what you're teaching and how you can further extend that content for every student on every level. So oftentimes, time doesn't permit for this. But if it does, you want to be ready. You don't ever want to have any dead air or lost time during the course. So at this point, if time permits, you're going to talk about what you could do so the students can continually build on what they just learned, the concepts you just taught in the course. How can they step outside the boundaries and get even greater knowledge about this content without you, outside of the four walls of the classroom? And then edTPA, one of the things they want you to do, which is great, is to retie your lesson that you just taught and just planned back to theoretic principles and research-based practices. So at this point, this is where you're going to go back to looking at exactly what theory was used. exactly what research-based practices were used. And you're going to want to talk about them in this section. We used cooperative learning in this section, and we utilized reciprocal teaching because we knew that the content of the vocabulary was difficult. So if the student could translate or code switch the words into the vocabulary into words that the students, their peers understood, then we could get a foundational knowledge. And then I could jump in as the teacher and fill in the gaps. So that would be an example of saying what the theoretical principles or research-based practices are in your lesson. This is very important on the edTPAs. This is a section that's graded specifically on the edTPAs. Of course, you got materials. What do you need for the lesson? What do the students need for the lesson? Then it moves us to part 3, which is probably to me, the most important part and most exciting part of teaching, which is the assessment plan. How are you going to assess your students, both formatively and summatively? Remember, formative assessment is assessment that happens during the learning. It's assessments that's showing whether the student is learning or not. What do they know? What do they not know as the lesson is being taught? Summative assessment is what happens after the lesson is being taught. What does the student know or not know after the lesson? The summative assessment is graded. The formative assessment is not graded. It's a spot check. It's really not even for the student. It's more for the instructor. It's more for the teacher. So you can know how to adjust your questions, your examples, your content as you're instructing to make sure that you're connecting with your students and they're understanding and able to apply and master what it is that you're teaching. So in this section here, you're going to, first of all, say how your assessment aligns with your objectives. So whatever the objectives back in section 1 that you wanted your students to learn, so how are you going to, how are you going to assess that? This assessment aligns with such and such a objective because it measures, what that objective is saying per se. So you'll do that piece, and then what do you want that evidence to be? So if it's a summative assessment, what's the evidence going to be? Is it going to be a paper? Is it going to be a presentation? Is it going to be a PowerPoint? Is it a written test? Is it multiple choice? Whatever that case is, how will you know that they understand that content? If it's formative assessment that you're describing here, the evidence of understanding, how will you know? They're able to answer quick questions. They're able to have a discussion with their peers. And as I walk around the room, I'll hear that discussion. I'll hear them using vocabulary and correcting each other. Maybe you will give them, if it's a project-based lesson, maybe you'll give them one piece, one part of the full project that they need to do, and then be able to tell you or tell each other why that piece is important to the whole project. So you need some type of evidence, whether it's a formative assessment or summative assessment, to see whether students are understanding what's going on. And then as you move from that assessment component, you move into part 4 of the lesson, which is not filled in here because this lesson wasn't taught. This was an exemplar from a student who's just learning to plan just like you. So your plan can take things to another level here. I just used this one as an example for you, right? You can extend what this student has done. That's perfectly fine. But in part 4, you're going to talk about, well, what worked and what didn't work. What will I change? Who didn't it work for? Why didn't it work for that student? So again, what are some of the adjustments that you can make in you? What are some of the adjustments you can make in the arrangement of the room, or maybe the order that you put the content in, maybe keywords, vocabulary, even how students should be arranged, whatever the case may be. And what are your changes if you were to teach this again? And then of course, justifying those changes. So that is the whole edTPA lesson planning template. Let me scroll back up to the top. I don't want to make you dizzy. I know I'm moving pretty fast here, but I'm going to scroll back up to the top just so you can see the title and remember what it is we're talking about. Now, if you have any questions about this template, please feel free to contact your instructor. You can always email me, newton.miller@ashford.edu, or you can contact your instructor right in the inbox in your course room. Again, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it helped you understand the edTPA template, and you know, make it a great day or not, because that choice is always yours.